This is
In the middle of it,
a podcast about
participation culture in Aotearoa.
Join us out in the field as we try to discover what it takes to grow participation culture in communities in Aotearoa.
here's the theory, here's some practice, and what happens when they intersect. This is praxis.
Johnny's binocular vision offers a really different way that's approachable from both sides. Quite expensive, and what's the less square way of thinking about that?
We're sort of all in different stages of the journey of trying to recircularize so that we can come into these binocular relationships and actually have conversations together about the future of our places and communities.
Kia ora and welcome to In the Middle of It. I'm Sissy Rock and I'm here with...
Duncan Matthews.
And Lucy Mary Mulholland.
And today we're looking at principles and practice. What's the praxis? Is praxis a wanky word?
Yes.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
Doesn't it mean the intersection of practice and
Principles?
principles?
Yeah, or theory, I think.
Theory.
Yeah, so I think it's a kind of an academic term. I stumbled across it in community development when they were talking about things academically and saying, look, actually, here's the theory, and that's my hands up high here. Here's some practice, and what happens when they intersect? This is praxis. And I thought that might be a cool thing for us to look at today. I mean, last time we were talking about what mapping threw up and some of the principles there that we had about getting alongside people, and everything happens in context. So, what's the praxis that we're noticing? Well, Lucy Mary, you introduced us to Johnnie Freeland, right?
Yes.
And we've all become fangirls and fanboys because he has a way of telling us about pieces of theory or principles that makes us feel like we can actually do things in practice.
Yeah, so let's hear Johnnie Freeland talking a little bit about this binocular concept and how he sees it coming alive in community development.
Thank you, Lucy Mary. I guess I'd describe my background as in youth and community development. And I guess in my upbringing, the elders pushed me to get more into a systems, public service space to sort of learn those ways to come back and be able to decipher back to whānau and our elders in the way they then needed to navigate our communities. A phrase coined by some of our nannies, they use the term recircularization, that in the regenerative approach around pursuing well-being, the well-being of those whakapapa systems that we need to recircularize ourselves. So what we'll be introducing is this concept of square systems and circular systems as a way of being able to create some sort of distinction, if you like, in terms of the lenses we may want to apply in our thinking in relation to that. So we've coined this phrase called squareization and defined our problem in terms of we're all working to heal and regenerate the state of well-being in terms of people, place and nature. From a Māori experience and from many other Indigenous peoples across the world, it's from those long-reaching impacts of what we call colonisation, westernisation and urbanisation. At the heart of that is a shift towards that individualised nature of being as opposed to a collective nature of being that leads to disconnected, displaced whakapapa. What we sort of see even across the world is a shift to circular systems thinking and practice from sort of what we call square. Within a square system, it's linear thinking, extractive, patriarchal. It centres about individual rights and interests. It's about anchoring in around power. Who has the power? Who has the resources? But what we're starting to see is a shift in terms of regenerative circular thinking and practice. And at the heart of that is regenerating the partnership between human and nature. So sort of being more nature anchored or nature centered in the way we sort of look to regenerate well-being and concepts like the commons, those common spaces that we share. Also, at the same time, we're sort of seeing a shift within our Te Ao Māori space as well. So moving again from square to circular spiral or takarangi thinking. Takarangi is a double spiral. But within a takarangi spiral, circular Māori circular system, so we're seeing that intergenerational whakapapa centered, and at the essence of that is more about the obligations and responsibilities, that idea of stewardship. And from a Māori perspective, this is where we start to touch on those principles of kaitiakitanga, being good caretakers as opposed to owners and, the decision makers over things. With these shifts, we're also starting to see a convergence And this is where the idea of the binocular lens starts to emerge from, when we start to think about Western regenerative circular thinking together with Mātauranga Māori spiral thinking. And the thing is, certainly from a Māori perspective, the biggest challenge for the last 200 years is trying to engage with the square system when inherently we're not square, but we get forced in some of these square processes. And so this regenerative approach is starting to see to circular systems thinking coming together to form this binocular view. And that's the exciting nature of these sort of what we call two shifts and a convergence that are unfolding around us at the moment. So when we start to think about a dual knowledge system, Mātauranga Arua is around this binocular view. It's not about binary perspectives. It's about holding place and recognizing space of these different worldviews to be able to come together. It's about the view through the binoculars, not so much the binoculars themselves. And that little knob in the middle of the binoculars that help calibrate the two lenses, it's really about the view beyond. And this is that exciting space, and that's where oranga or wellbeing sits, and being able to create the shared view across our communities and how we're bringing together sort of Western circular thinking alongside Mātauranga Māori spiral circular thinking.
I mean, that's great, listening to him talking like that. And I just want to let people who are listening to this podcast know we've actually got the full video of that available on the
Community Think website. We'll link it into the show notes.
Yeah. You know, it is well worth taking a moment out to listen to.
Definitely, yeah. And it's been hugely inspiring. I think what I've loved about that principle being live in this project is it hasn't just sort of been a principle theory stuck up on the wall. It's really been picked up by our weavers and brought to life through the ways they use tools and see time and engage with place. And yeah, it's been amazing to see. I love in particular the Glenview team that we have these meetings, and sometimes I'll float an idea and they'll say, oh, that's a very square way of doing things. Could we circularize that? Could we make that more of a circle thing? And they'll challenge, you know, the spreadsheets and the kind of the forms, and see if there's more of a relational, like, storytelling approaches to things, or particularly challenging the sense of time, how the speed at which things happen, and that feeling of time, and letting things happen organically versus trying to drive a process through time. That's really come across for our teams. And in particular, the Glenview team has really challenged, I guess, what they sort of see as kind of a more square framing of their place, and wanting to return to the original kind of sense of identity of place, the manga ko tukutuku.
Really starting to see the sort of square worldviews that I have. But I didn't even... You know, I mean, I shouldn't really be surprised, but I surprised myself by being surprised that I hadn't known. So emotional intelligence would be an example of that. Mm-hmm. A really big fan of thinking about emotional intelligence, and was about to go and lead a coaching session on it. And I thought, actually, I might just Google emotional intelligence in Te Ao Māori. And actually, yes, an article comes up that says, well, emotional intelligence is like this idea that an individual... But in Te Ao Māori, it's a whānau. It's the smallest unit is looking at things through a whānau, a collective. Our intelligence sits with all of us. But, well, yeah, so how do I feel now about going and delivering this coaching session? It's changed how I feel about the things that I am delivering, and I'm so much more aware of my own very square world.
Yeah, I love that image Johnny's got of the sort of two squares on the edge of the page, and then arrows pointing into the center to these two circles. And I think, like, there's that, it's not just sort of, oh, we flick a switch and suddenly we're in the binoculars. It's like we're sort of all on different stages of the journey of trying to, the term he uses, recircularize, so that we can come into these binocular relationships and actually have conversations together about the future of our places and communities. And I feel like that as well. I'm sort of like, you know, in between the square and the circle, trying to, in the middle of it, trying to work out, what does this look like? How do I relearn myself?
And when he talks about that piece in the binocular that helps you get the clear vision.
Focus.
Yeah, the focus. You know, I remember being a little girl, my grandparents had binoculars, you know, and I'd hold them. They're quite heavy. You know, and you've always got to have them around your neck in case you drop them, looking out to the beach and trying to get the focus. And I feel like I've only just worked out that the cover's been on one lens, you know, and I think I'm personally really into circular things. You know, I'm very, you know, I've the circular economy I've always been very interested in, working collectively. You know, I've talked about play centre and the cooperative approach, but I've only ever sort of seen that in relation to my Western sort of mainstream way of thinking. And what I like about what Johnny's bringing forward is he's saying, you know, Te Ao Māori circular, Western circular. We look through that, we start to see things differently. There's a third something where these two things come together. But what I think some of our weavers have reflected back to me is they're already working through Te Ao Māori. You know, that's already there. That they don't have any learning really to do. And you know, that's us. We have to catch up. I don't know. Is that how you feel?
Totally. Yeah, I feel I love the weavers kind of challenging me. You know, they're like, you know, float this idea, and they'll be like, oh, that's a bit square, and I'm like, oh yeah, it is. Like, and it is that feeling of like, yep, still got work to do to, like, you know, not go down those tried and true pathways that actually just result in that very individualistic, exploitative, kind of deadening type culture that is what we're trying to work.
Let's go and hear Charles talking about binocular vision, one of the principles.
When I look at the Matua's mahi, he speaks a lot about treaty partnerships and treaty relationships. Another context that sits within our rohi in our area as well is the relationship with the kingitanga, which is a very important piece of the makeup of what it means to be Waikato Tainui. And once again, working within the area that comes under that banner, we were fortunate enough to receive a pai marire as a part of the opening of our whole kaupapa. So it really is aligning ourselves with those treaty partnerships, treaty relationships, tangata tiriti, tangata whenua. And once again, it just helps things move along when we begin to engage with the different dynamics of our people within our area. You know, a lot of Māori sit within our area, so it's ensuring that we kind of align ourselves with not only, you know, the principles that sit within this mahi, but the principles that sit with the tangata whenua and the whānau here as well. So also continuing to look at because sometimes a lot of these relationships can start out as square ones, but Matua Johnny talks a lot about how do we shift from these square relationships into these more reciprocal circular relationships as well, and using things like tikanga and kawa and understanding, you know, the context of the whenua and the land as well, just helps when we begin to move through these relationships that can start off a little bit square, but end up, you know, becoming a lot more reciprocal in terms of the awhi atu, awhi mai, tuakana taina relationships that probably last, are long lasting. Yeah.
And so what did you take away from that, Sissy?
Well, really about the work I need to do on myself. For me, it feels like a very accessible way for me to uphold my responsibilities. You know, when I think about Te Tiriti o Waitangi and how in community, you know, we need to be finding ways to do that as small community organisations, as a project group, you know, where I don't think mana whenua want to engage on our 30-day engagement on cycle lanes necessarily.
I've really noticed a default assumption in a lot of community spaces about how working under or as part of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, you know, sharing power should literally be shared decision making, or, you know, you've got an advisory group or co-governance. And so Johnny's binocular vision offers a really different way that's approachable from both sides without, as you were talking about, Sissy, you know, requiring someone from mana whenua to come up and show up to our thing to participate in our decision-making processes. So it's quite expensive, and I want to use the term freeing, but, you know, away from there's one way that working under Te Tiriti in partnership with Māori should look like, to what's the less square way of thinking about that, and the way that we can look at that and work on it collectively, individually, every day, rather than...
Yeah, well, we know Pākehā need to do the work for themselves, right? And this, I think, is a way of allowing you to do your own work, not requiring someone else to do something to meet.
Well, is it a way for us as Pākehā to do the work collectively rather than individually?
Well, that will be something that we can see.
So, Sissy, could you give us some examples of how you've used practice in your practice in the last 10, 20 years?
I think that there is things that come out, because, this is what this is about, right? We have a theory, and then we're putting it into practice, and then we're seeing this thing emerge. I might be jumping ahead of myself here, but one of the things that we've been talking about is community smarts. So, I'm saying, myself, I've done a lot of community development over the years. I started in my late 20s when I was at Play Centre, and, I was talking to Marie about this, over cake and coffee, and we were kind of laughing about being what we might call undereducated. So we're undereducated. We haven't got degrees. We haven't been trained in community development, but we've got this innate love of people. We feel like we want to get things going, and we coined this phrase community smarts. So to me, that's an example of praxis where on the ground you need certain things, certain attributes. There's a theory about what's required. When you push those two things together, out comes this new kind of concept. I don't know whether that, if any academics are listening, you're welcome to contact me. But that's an example that I think of as praxis. Perhaps another one might be rhythm, where we've been playing around with this idea of, Johnnie talks about the rhythm of nature, of the seasons. There's a fantastic piece where he talks about lunar cycles, 3 lunar cycles, 90 days of observation. In fact, I think it would be worthwhile dropping in and listening to that now.
It takes 90 days of observation to just get a sense of what patterns. So 3 lunar cycles, and that requires us to do 2 things. We go and do an observation hikoi, like a 30 or 40 minute walk every morning. So he has to do it at the same time every day for 90 days in the same location. What you start to see over those 3 lunar cycles is patterns and cycles emerging. Even right down to you start seeing the same people every morning at that time walking their dog, and so you start to say hello and you start to connect, and over time you start to see, trees and things that might be all just green, but you start to appreciate the different textures of green and the different, and we're just observing, we're not reflecting, we're not reinterpreting, we're just, and in a sense, what we're looking for is, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel outside me and around me, and also within me? So in terms of starting to just that introduction to calibrating to place, to calibrating to those cycles, is we do a minimum of 90 days in a row if we can. But we're humans, we're not always there, weather, whatever. But what that starts to influence is your appreciation of place. And if, in a sense, place will reveal itself to you because you're a constant. And more time we do that, I'd say 90 days is a minimal, but if you're in the community, and it's just, it's good for your well-being, just get up, start moving, and you start to see those patterns. And it's about looking up to the sky, looking around you, just so that you soak that in, and that's part of that. And we have like an observation sort of diary where you just record your observations. Then later you start to go in, and then you start to reflect on what your observations, and then you start to see the patterns emerge, both before you when you're out there, but also in terms of how you maintain your observation. So that's what the device is. The phone's really cool, because other than a phone, it's a recorder, it's a picture taker, video taker. So even, that in a way is a way of harvesting your observations. For example, my wife, she did a 90-day observation of a catchment, where she just posted every day on Facebook what her observations were. And then people started to tune into that, and then they started to share their experiences of the same catchment, and so all you need is the same time of the day and the same location, because those are the 2 points that are constant. So that, because if you did it any other time of the day, your observations are going to be all over the place, because it's different times, different locations.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so to me, if we have that as an idea and then we go and do it, so we go and do 90 days of observation, walking around our same neighbourhood for 10 minutes and seeing what will the praxis be of that. Maybe some people out there will want to go and try that here's an idea, here's us doing it. What comes out of that? What do you know about praxis? I mean, you're pretty academic, aren't you?
Yeah, I've heard people use the word praxis a lot and then just sort of put it as one of those things that I don't quite understand or need to understand. I think I would actually class myself as terrible at putting theory into practice, because I'll know the theory and then I'll just go and run around on the ground and do whatever I kind of think is right. And I'm sure there's kind of some subconscious application of theory into practice. And so perhaps what I am good at doing is reflecting afterwards, what went well, what didn't go well, how might you do stuff next time. But I'm not sure if that's what you would call as practice in terms of proactively developing like a new theory or something like that. I can see you Googling the definition.
Yeah, I just Google it and it says the word praxis just means practice, or more precisely, the process of putting theory into practice or the practical application of a theory or idea.
So it's interesting, isn't it, when it's just a word to describe a generic process, which is something we've all done, we all do, but I didn't feel that I was smart enough to claim that word.
And I guess the distinction is that you can have the theory,
Yeah.
or perhaps you just have the practice and you don't understand the theory about why you're doing something. And then the praxis is those two things coming together. So if we use the community smarts idea, we've got this theory about weavers having A, B, C and D. And then we've got me and Marie talking about us just getting out there and doing it when we were younger. And then we put those two things together and come up with this idea of community smarts are needed, something that's not an idea that sits in someone's head, but has some theory underpinning the just going out and doing it.
Is there also something about the flow between those two things, that rather than it just being a one-way theory is turned into some activity, there's this feeling of activity then also producing a new understanding of theory or producing a new idea, so this kind of spiral type thing happening.
I love that. That's our definition of praxis.
Cool.
We're reclaiming.
And I think it goes back to our whole thing, like relationships before ideas, right? Is like theory is like ideas that we have about things, and allowing them to both inform, bringing people together, but also the coming together of people actually helps inform our understandings of community and what that means.
And so the relationships is the practice, and the praxis is when those two things come together.
Yeah, and there's this kind of spiral of kind of informing each other over time.
Yeah, I like it.
It's pretty smart.
You heard that here and now. Fresh thinking.
First in the middle of it.
Well, that's the thing about being in the middle of something, right? You've actually got to take time to make meaning of it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think this is something I really love about this project, is this kind of commitment to being in that middle space where we're getting out doing stuff, coming back into that kind of quiet reflective space to see what does this mean, what does this inform in terms of our understandings and assumptions, and where we go from here, and then back out again, learn something, come back. And I think it's quite unique in a way that it's sort of, I think, in the academic world, sometimes we can spend too long in that reflective space that we've kind of lost touch with what's happening on the ground, or sometimes we can be so busy out on the ground that we're not pausing to reflect, actually we've kind of spiraled off here, we've kind of lost our way. So having that kind of dance between the two, that being in the middle space, I think is very powerful.
And how have we already sort of evolved our praxis through this process of setting up these pilots?
Well, it sounds like a rhetorical question. Why don't you have a go at answering that?
I think back in episode 3, I said that no plan survives contact with the real world. And so, even just a couple of months in now, we're looking back at some of our plans, our dreams, our application, and being like, we were dreaming. That's just, you talk to one person on the ground and they're like, nah. And you're like, oh yeah, that's me sitting behind my 49-inch computer screen at 10 a.m. on a Friday with a coffee. That doesn't doesn't relate to what needs to happen on the ground. And, you know, when you're wandering alongside manga tukutuku, you know, in a winter's evening.
It's beautiful down there, by the way.
I love the
The
Waikato
weavers
River.
took me down to the awa and we stood there on the little bridge and just looking at all the panga trees and kawakawa and just this
I
quiet
grew up
bubble
in
of the river.
alongside the Waikato River and spent a good bit of time in Hamilton. Love it down there.
Yeah, I think you know, recently I made a statement about how I value grappling, and you laughed and said there's just so much to grapple with. And I guess that's the thing about making sure that you have enough time to, ferment your thinking and actually do something with the result. Like, I think sometimes we do something reflective and then we don't. We've gone this far now. Next time we'll remember, rather than, I think what we like to do is say, right here and now we're going to intervene.
Yeah, we tick the box. Oh, yeah, we've done our reflective hui.
Yeah.
Job done.
Where we sort of go, let's, yes, we've got some learning, but there might not be a next time. Let's apply it right here and now. And so we have to quickly change or, pivot or do something that might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we know that if we don't do something, we've got hold of something that's meaningful, that we should do something with. Do you agree? Or
Yeah, no, I do agree.
Yeah.
Applying something, in the moment, in the meeting, is quite powerful, and also a very particular skill of confidence in the relationships that you have with people in the room.
I was thinking about what you were saying before. Before you're like, we work with what is, and I had a therapy supervisor used to say, it's all just grist to the mill. It's like everything coming in. That what's live at the moment is part of what we're being asked to grapple with. It's not that we're just working with our theory and we're trying to apply it in. It's, okay, there's all these different forces and dynamics and aspects coming in. How do we grapple with all of that? We're holding on to some question, but we're allowing ourselves to be in a space that's flooded with all sorts of different contextual kind of elements, I guess.
Well, folks, I think we're coming to the end of episode 5. Really, maybe even us getting to understand what praxis meant live in the moment, and an unraveling of actually, do we know what we're talking about? Duncan, what are we going to talk about next episode?
Yeah, episode 6. We're talking about metaphors that are emerging through our work alongside the weavers and community. So join us then. We look forward to having you back with us.
I think Lucy and Mary will definitely talk about the magnet effect. Yeah?
I love the magnet.
Okay, until then, ka kite.
See you later.
Thanks goes to 104.6 Planet FM Community Access Radio Auckland for their excellent recording studio and guidance in producing this podcast. The music is Pistoriosis by Shane Ivers of soundmanmusic.com, Mel Jonason for bringing together draft episodes, Mish Maskell for the audio engineering. Thanks also this episode to Johnnie Freeland, Pai Whakatere, for his recording and presentation at Camp Wired, which you heard today. Hear the full interview on the Community Think website, communitythink.nz. Thanks also to our weavers Libby, Jalen, Charles, Tui, Nay, Holly, Lisa, Ray and Carol, some of who appeared on this episode.